Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a special day for us as we are running the webinar in a new and interactive techniques, as we have invited the regional best practitioner in the cinema field to showcase the best practices in the cinema acoustics and mechanics construction. Our today webinar would be the 6th technical webinar as we are going in a row, and it's titled The Ultimate Guide for Cinema Ceilings and Walls. Our speakers are Mr. Paul Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz has an extensive experience as acoustic consultant with demonstrated history in working of architects and planning industry with a strong education of professional skilled in feasibility studies, environmental impact assessments, construction, sustainable design, and architectural acoustics. Also, we have our colleague, Mr. John Andrews. Mr. John Andrews is our technical sales manager based in USG Middle East office in UAE. Andrews had received a BA degree in architecture from Hull School of Architect, and he's currently working with USG Middle East as our technical sales manager in the region. His professional interest for the past 25 years focus on the development of gypsum solution for ceiling and partitions, with particular focus on acoustic, fire, and mechanics performance required in a major commercial projects. So, welcome to USG Middle East 6th technical webinar in its new form. The title for this technical webinar would be The Ultimate Guide for Cinema Ceilings and Wall. The webinar today will present interesting topics for the project's designer and contractors, featuring two main aspects for the cinema construction, that are the design part about the cinema acoustic design and the cinema construction part. During our today technical webinar, we will present the following points. We will have a cinema case studies, integrated cinema solution, the twin framing systems, the Auditoria to public area wall partitions, the Auditoria to Auditoria wall partitions, cinema curved wall, cinema finishing solutions, and the cinema ceiling mass barrier. As always, we're trying to be USG Middle East to play a vital role in the MENA region to meet and present the latest technologies in the building materials industry. And thus, we are delighted for the continuous technical summits, which we are conducting on a monthly basis, where we have considered the last Tuesdays of each month, 3 p.m. KSA time, GMT +3, with exception for today webinar timing due to Ramadan timing. Please always remember to save the dates to your calendar. Our next webinar would be conducted on the 25th of May and will be presented by our colleague, Mr. Karim Mansour. The webinar will be present the drywall suspension systems for shaft wall and drywall assemblies. As we are always saying that your attendance and support are considered the main engine behind our success for these consecutive online webinars. This is to confirm the importance and the collaboration in the building materials industry between the manufacturers, the designers, distributors, and also the contractors. At USG Middle East, we work very close with our partners, project stakeholders, and other businesses to share the best practices and find new ways to advance performance, even more closer with the regulators and construction influencers to meet the latest construction regulations and building codes for material supply compliance. Also, to confirm our mission is to deliver innovations that helps you to work smarter, do better, and build better. For the attendants who are attending our webinar for the first time, just a quick brief about USG Middle East in advance. We have multiple manufacturing facilities based in Dammam, Saudi Arabia, in Doha, Qatar, and in Turkey that allow us to supply any project in speed and high technical support. And the company owns for more than 1,300 registered patents with more than 334 UL assemblies, which is a result for our dedications of excellence and innovation. We are your single source system manufacturer for acoustical ceiling and wall partition. Kindly note that this technical webinar will be recorded and we will share it with all participants after the meeting ends. Again, thanks to our technical speakers for this webinar, Mr. Paul Schwartz and John Andrews. Each participant will receive an 1-hour credit for continuing professional development CPD certificate after this webinar. Please for the questions raised during this technical webinar, just put it in the chat box, and we will be happy to answer all of your questions and technical queries accordingly after we finish this technical webinar. So now let me leave this the pitch for my colleague Mr. Paul and John for the technical webinar. Paul? Paul, you are on mute. Paul, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? I think I'm there.
Yes, indeed.
Good.
Yes.
Technology is working. Wonderful.
Yes,
thank
wonderful.
you, Mr. And thank you very much for the invitation to join you today and speak. Just so everybody is aware, obviously I am Paul Schwartz. I am the managing partner of the Acoustics division of Design Confidence here in Dubai, and also the owner and technical director of the Dubai Acoustic Research Laboratory. And we do a lot of work in cinemas, various other constructions, but I actually started my career in cinemas nearly 25 years ago back in the UK. And my very first construction project was the fit out of the Apollo Cinemas, which was on Regent Street in London. A very interesting project where not only did we have to tackle the usual sound insulation and absorption issues that every cinema gets, but also there were some interesting building services issues and a metro line that ran directly underneath the site, and an escalator pit that was directly on top of the site. So pretty much about as difficult a cinema project as you could ever likely to get was my very first project in all of construction. Yep, and now here in the Middle East. Now I believe, Musba, our the format for today is that I'm going to do an architectural acoustics presentation, and effectively an independent presentation of what I believe to be the critical issues to do with design and performance of cinema spaces, specifically with a focus on issues that we face here in the Middle East. And John is going to join me and contribute and comment on, I guess, what Boral is able to provide in terms of the criteria that we put out there. And then we're going to kind of swap roles. I believe John is then going to present on Boral, and I'm going to have the chance to commentate on his input. So yes, if John is ready to go.
I am indeed. As ready as I'll ever be.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I guess if I just simply start by sharing my screen, which hopefully with the miracle of modern technology, you can all now see.
Yes, yes, we can see your screen, Paul.
Okay, so this is my entity. So what we will be talking about today is really the risk and reward of acoustic design and acoustic design specifically with regards to cinemas and the design requirements that come along with those. Now, John, as you know, I think one of the main issues, and there's a long list of them, that we generally find with cinemas currently is that we find that with a lot of developments, operators are typically perhaps using different standards at different times, and they're all pretty much based on the United States. The American cinema design standards were born out of THX, which itself came about when the first Star Wars films was developed and released. George Lucas in particular was very keen that standard cinemas up to that point, it was going to seriously affect the quality of the movie-going experience unless cinemas could guarantee or be certified to achieve a certain level, which was where the THX standards were born from. THX being a slightly earlier film that George Lucas had developed. But he basically said, these THX standards mean that your cinema sound system, your projector system, and the quality of the acoustics in your Auditoria need to be of this particular standard, or we recommend these standards. And that's what the kind of global standards have latched onto and being developed in line with since then. However, there is no fixed international agreed standard, unlike other standards that cinemas need to be designed to. So, yeah, as you're aware, John, we've got a few different interpretations of these standards out there, which I guess you guys see on a fairly regular basis also.
Yes, this is a constant thing. Each operator has slightly different requirements in the market. Usually, especially when we're looking at the acoustics, it's usually to do with the frequency ranges that they want basically reduced or not to pass through the walls. When the first cinemas started, as if you all remember, because I'm quite old, cinemas used to be just independent units showing the one film, and it was about 27 years ago that they started with the multiplex, where we had 4 or 5 cinemas together, and this is where some of the major complications came, because we have to isolate each individual box. So I'm sure Paul will go into how we measure this and what the general requirements, or more specifically, the actual requirements are needed within this presentation.
Exactly right. So, yeah, as John pointed out there, typically we look at in-box constructions, especially when we look at existing facilities, existing locations that might not have been designed or built initially with cinemas in mind. And of course, as everybody is aware, within Saudi Arabia, that is going to be the vast majority of existing locations that are not new build. We're going to be, and we have been, attempting to put cinemas into spaces that really never considered cinemas that would ever be a tenant at any point in the future. So what are the lessons that we've learned from Saudi Arabia to start with? Because we can start with that, and then we'll get into how we got about the criteria that are used to design the spaces that we use now. So as I mentioned just now, suitability of potential locations for conversion to cinema use is one of the absolute key points. Spaces that were not designed with appropriate electrical capacity, they may not have been designed thinking that there's going to need to be the food and beverage priorities given to the cinemas over the other food and beverage outlets that might be in the cinema space. Identifying those potential problems and the performance gaps in the existing building themselves. So it's all very well and good understanding and knowing that your electrical capacity is not enough, or that your building services provision may need to be swapped out, or that the slab may not be thick enough or structurally sound enough in order to take the loading that we're potentially looking at, although that's slightly less of an issue. It's really about having the confidence of the information of the existing buildings that we're moving into. The acoustics, the structures, the MEP, the architecture and the interior design all need to be confident of the quality of the shell of the space that we're moving into. And unfortunately, a lot of the locations we've been involved with so far, that information is either not available or not entirely complete. So it is then down to the incoming contractor to ensure that they have got absolutely up-to-date information, condition surveying done to ensure that when they take responsibility for starting to do the work, that they're very well aware of exactly what needs to be done to bring the space up to spec before we actually even start converting it for use for a cinema. So that's pretty critical. Evaluating the experience of the local contractors and local suppliers, which in the last 2 years, as you can imagine, for the last 40 years to 60 years in Saudi Arabia, with very few, if any, public performance venues, including cinemas, a lot of the local suppliers are not really used to the specific requirements of such the performances expected of their materials, but they are upskilling incredibly quickly and adapting to the standards that are expected of these developments very, very quickly. So that's very encouraging. And obviously any company, any supplier that is based in Saudi Arabia is at a significant advantage, especially with the headquarters or a significant part of their distribution network available in Saudi Arabia. The materials and the quality of the materials are there, and something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on is just ensuring that those products are tested and certified to the correct standard in the correct way, so that the contractors and the project managers of these projects have confidence that these products are actually meeting the required standard. Because if they don't meet the required standard, they won't really be considered even at pre-qualification level. We're going to do a quick review of the existing standards and the updates to performance criteria, future-proofing, as it were, looking at what exactly is being proposed now for performance standards and what is going to be happening in the future. And then a chat about condition surveying and commission testing at the mid-build and the end of the project. Quite a lot of things there. John, is there anything that you might want to add in, or I suspect you'll just want to comment on those as we go through?
Yeah, I'll go into those as we go through it. As you mentioned earlier, the main thing is what unit we are going into, and we really, as a manufacturer, we need to be highly aware of what needs to be built and what are the restrictions before we can actually price people, because the prices could be varying 25–50% on the construction type that we have to do to achieve the values that you require acoustically.
And just kind of outline what is the kind of the standard, or what are you hoping of from the space in terms of the quality and preparation of it before you guys hit the ground or are in a position to actually start fitting out your projects? Because obviously we're aware for a new build, it's reasonably controllable, but for an existing premises, as you guys have already experienced, the quality of the spaces you come in to start your work in can be quite varied.
Yes, there's quite a few considerations, and some of them are considerations that aren't immediately obvious. For instance, if a typical wall is maybe 12 to 14 meters high, but the spaces that they have, there's no way of actually delivering a 14-meter long stud into that area. So the logistics of an area is also very, very important, and that can add a huge amount of cost to the customer. And we actually need to be aware of what we can and can't deliver into the area. So it may well be that there's a restriction on long vehicles at a certain time of day. So we then know that we only have to deliver in the evenings. The other main considerations are the head detail. The head detail, typically, we've got tremendous loads that are going onto these walls, and it's the head restraint that is probably the most important. And when we look at it in depth, a lot of these projects, we need to be aware of the way we can fix. For instance, if it's a sandwich panel ceiling, are we allowed to fix into that sandwich panel, or is there a restriction? If there is a restriction, then the detailing becomes a lot more complicated and the cost goes up.
And presumably, yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it there, and certainly one of the big lessons that we've been involved in the past is the confidence or the knowledge that the landlord may or may not have about their own structure, and the ability to tie your elements in to the existing structure, which is obviously a critical element and a very big question mark, because that's going to make a very big difference to installation time and, for example, any perhaps additional support material required around your systems, just so that they can simply be installed. So having that confidence and knowledge, I'm guessing, is going to be pretty critical from your side.
Yes, and the other thing is, obviously we've got installers now at the moment that are starting to understand these restrictions, and when they're pricing at tender stage, the cost difference may be tremendous to someone that doesn't understand these restrictions. Yeah. And that has to be, we have to have a way of highlighting that to the cinema owner or operator, that there is a vast difference between the prices due to one person understanding construction and the other one not understanding the construction that will be required.
Understood. Okay, well, let's jump straight into the regulatory environment, and then we can talk about design standards, and then kind of move into specific items on the design in terms of risk and reward, problems and solutions. So, as everybody knows, at the moment, Saudi Arabia is effectively developed their regulations around the International Building Code and the Saudi Building Code. They actually have their own regulatory environmental framework and construction standards, which, similar to the UAE, are based quite loosely on UK, the British standards, but not in every respect. Cinemas, for example, and public performance spaces don't really have a specific mention, apart from some kind of cursory mention of demising walls and external walls. They don't really go into a lot of detail about performance spaces and what is required in order to achieve specific standards, unlike BS 8233 in the UK or certain European or Australian standards. So really it's left for the developers and the operators to develop their own standards, or the individual consultants to be putting forward what they believe to be the case. And this has really led to one of the main reasons why, across maybe 4 or 5 different operators, or indeed 11 operators as we seem to have now in Saudi Arabia, that you're going to have a multitude of different standards being adopted. It's really down to individual interpretation. And I think one of the important outputs from the Meta Cinema Forum, which has done a very good job of bringing the cinema development and construction community together over the last few years, one of the important outputs from the last seminar was a suggestion was that some kind of technical steering committee or technical guidance is given by the community for the community. And I think that would be a very interesting proposition, and presumably something that the suppliers and manufacturers like Boro would very much want to be involved with and help to steer, John.
On muting, because yeah, it's something that we definitely we want to be involved with, because with the cinema and with Boro, and specifically with USG Boro, we actually act as a drywall consultant, not just as a supplier. So we can interact with the structural, the M&E, acoustic engineers such as yourself, and the architectural input to make sure that we are providing A, walls that are fit for purpose, and B, that everything is closer integrated, especially with the direction of MEP services and how that should be channeled around the building space itself without interrupting A, the mechanical strength of the wall, and B, the acoustic strength as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, I mean, this technical committee, this technical steering group would be, I think, would be a very welcome addition to the industry. I mean, it focus specifically on cinema and public performance spaces, but it would help to have such input right the way across lots of industries, and an input from the suppliers and manufacturers as well as the contractors who are actually physically building these things is, I think, pretty critical. It's all very well and good us designers kind of sitting there and thrashing out details on bits of paper and coming up with theoretical solutions, but we don't actually have to roll our sleeves up and physically build it and make it happen. And we certainly don't have to build it within a certain budget, although questions certainly get asked if solutions we're putting forward push the costs up. So it would be very interesting to get a very wide range of people from backgrounds inputting into such a group.
But Paul, please, if you allow me here, since you are expert in the acoustics and in the cinema specialized, whom do you think that should be leading this committee? Yeah, and this has been a proposal for the past couple of years, but till now we still don't see it in a practice, having the committee. So, but who should lead the creation of this this wonderful committee? Who should be the
Well, I think the energy and the impetus is effectively going to come from the main players in the market. So that'll be the developers, the operators, the project managers, the contractors, the suppliers, and the consultants like myself. The direction and to allow it to happen is obviously it's got to come from the regulators themselves. It's got to come from government. It's got to come from the units and the government departments that are overseeing and pushing this forward. Because at the end of the day, you and I and a whole load of other industry professionals can get together in a room and talk about this, but it's really only going to get adopted if it's got some teeth. And it's only going to have some teeth if the regulators, for example, that would be GCAM in Saudi Arabia, that would be the TV and Film Commission in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and the equivalent departments in the other GCC countries. They've got to get behind it, and they've got to say, yes, we recognize that's important, that's what needs to happen. Please, guys, make it happen, and as soon as it does, we'll be on board with it. Because, yeah, look, we can run around like headless chickens and make something like that happen, but really, if it's not going to be taken seriously by the regulators in the industry, then there's not a lot of point going ahead with it. But I believe that it has been recognized. It's now been mentioned several times in the Meta Forum in the last couple of years, and I believe it's starting to take foothold. In America and Europe, they've got the association, the American Film Association, and you've got the equivalent in Europe and the UK. So there are these bodies that do exist, these technical steering committees that advise the government departments as to the direction and standards that could perhaps be being followed, and an association of approved kind of players in the market as such, those who've proved their experience and qualifications to be delivering to a certain standard. That would be very welcome. But I think there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen with government entities and government departments first. I think it needs to start there. So, moving forward then, risk and reward. What happens when it goes right and what happens when it goes wrong? I mean, specifically with regards to cinemas, I'm sure John will attest to this, because I know you've come across many situations like this. When you get insufficient sound insulation between adjacent cinemas, and when you have excessive vibration from mechanical services or from external sources, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, or an inefficient MEP design, or an MEP design that's perhaps been forced to comply with a wider mall strategy or an existing situation that it doesn't quite work, then we start to have potential problems with the acoustics. And the potential problems with the acoustics will result in a user experience that is compromised. And this user experience is something which obviously the cinema operators are very keen to avoid. When somebody pays their money and goes into a cinema, effectively they're being expected to kind of put the rest of their worries in the world on hold for a while and be transported to another place where they can kind of be lost or immersed within that film world for a little while. And the same with any kind of public performance. Any interruption of that due to noise that's not being expected or vibration, which is not part of the programming material that they're seeing, will interrupt that, and invariably will result in a depreciation of the perception of quality of those spaces. And that all starts with the very basic shell design and construction of the building that we're looking at. So we want to try and avoid that compromising of the user experience. We want to avoid those interruptions if at all possible. What tends to happen not only is the tenant or the visiting customer, when their experience is interrupted and their experience is compromised, invariably if they don't come back, that means the footfall tends to drop. The cinema operator is going to be fairly unhappy about that. They're going to want to pay less rent in terms of their tenancy. Their contract value is going to be reduced because they're not being able to use the space effectively. Now, of course, this is if the problem is due to the existing shell rather than the fit-out work that they themselves have done. However, there is one major example of this that is cited many, many times whenever there is an issue of the existing shell being compromised, and that is a very well-known mall in Dubai that was being operated by a very well-known operator, which at the time was not owned by the mall owner. And there were compromises made during the fit-out of that construction of that cinema, and it resulted in 3 or 4 of the Auditoria not being used by the operator because the acoustics were compromised. Sound could be heard between the adjacent Auditoria. The cinema operator went back to the mall operator and said, well, we can't use 100% of our Auditoria. We're not going to pay you 100% of the tenancy contract. We're going to pay you 60 or 70%. Now, as you can imagine, that was a huge reduction in the contract value. And the next time that mall owner and the operator both joined forces to develop a new cinema, they made it very, very clear that that problem would never be experienced again, or anybody working on that project would simply not be involved with either the operator or the mall owner in any capacity ever again. And so that made people very much focus and concentrate on what was going to be done. We looked at the design standards and we made sure that they were not going to have a repeat of that problem. The fact that they came to the company that I was working for at the time to ensure that that never happened again. It was initially due to a problem to do with coordination. The design was done outside of Dubai and was perfectly good design, but when it came to Dubai, unfortunately, there's some value engineering that took place, and the value engineering happened, as is often the case, without the relevant parties being able to say, no, hang on a minute, you can't do that. That's going to have a pretty significant negative impact on this. So that coordination, and I'll come back to coordination a little bit later in the talk, is absolutely critical. Now, it's probably goes without saying, John, that you and your team would want to be involved in any design or any coordination of design as early as is humanly possible within any project, I'm guessing.
Yeah, this is something that is vitally important to us. More for the fact that we want to basically offer the guarantee to the customer or the end user that the systems that we've provided are fit for purpose. And just as an example, I think we've done over 40 to 45 cinema complexes at the moment in the last 8 to 9 years. Each one has passed or exceeded the acoustic requirements that were asked for at the start of the project. And that was due to us spending a lot of time, very, very early doors, coordinating and identifying potential risk to our system. And I know it sounds very pretentious, but the risk to the system is critical. And if the system is compromised in any way due to services or incorrect detailing, and this is something that comes down very much to experienced installers now, incorrect detailing, then it's very, very easy to lose the acoustic performances or the mechanical strength that is required within the construction of a cinema.
Yeah. And funny enough, my last point there is exactly right. It's about providing a shell which is fit for purpose, which is obviously between you guys and the contractor is a critical issue. So in terms of mitigating those issues, mitigating these risks, obviously feasibility studies need to be done as comprehensively as possible, as early as possible, to ensure that the locations and the shells that are not designed for cinema fit out, that we understand exactly what needs to be done to bring them up to spec, up to scratch. We do a gap analysis, and so that everybody knows exactly what they're getting to start with, so there are no question marks. Construction budgets don't balloon out of control, and really that's all about having the right amount of information as early as possible in the project. Provision of utilities, incoming electrical supplies, access for deliveries for food and beverage, everything like this. Building services, existing building services, a big issue that we found in Saudi Arabia. Very often we're taking over spaces where other tenants are going to have their building services very close to the cinema demise, which as any MEP contractor, and of course you guys know at Oral, we can't have building services very close to the cinema demise on the roof or adjacent in terms of horizontal, because any transfer of noise and vibration energy into the cinema demise could potentially cause a big problem. So identifying those building services, identifying the ones that need to be moved, and informing the landlord that what needs to happen in terms of moving of those critical items needs to happen at a very early stage, because that also needs to be programmed into the schedule, the construction schedule, and it's no good finding out about that kind of thing at the last minute. Again, costs go up and programs start to get pushed out. The cladding of the malls that we found to date has been ranged from perfectly adequate and very good to pretty diabolical, almost like Swiss cheese. And you may say, well, these are box in box constructions. What's the problem? Why do we need to be considering the cladding? Well, the cladding of an external mall and the protection of the internal space, the internal cinemas, is a critical aspect of cinema design. You might have a cinema, a multiplex cinema, that is in the middle of nowhere and incredibly low environmental noise levels, and that's fantastic. However, it is also the case where you could have malls which are adjacent to major highways, close to metro lines, under the flight path of airports, and that considerable amount of noise that's coming in from the environment, as you can imagine, if you've got an existing structure that has got a lot of holes in it, effectively allowing that external noise to pass through completely unabated, there is the potential for that noise to be heard within the cinema, unless very specific and very clever sound insulation techniques are applied to the ceiling of the cinema, and we effectively have mass barrier ceiling design and provision, which is something Boral is quite used to providing, isn't it, John?
Yeah, and it's one of the first things that we look at is obviously the external noise, just to put everyone's fears at rest, as it were. There is always a solution to stopping this sound when there's a Swiss cheese, as Paul calls it, building. But what that means is that has to, if that is identified early enough, we can get it priced and into the tender. If it's not spotted early enough with the correct feasibility study, which is, as Paul's been alluding to, the additional cost and detailing and sometimes loss of floor space, which is highly dangerous to the operator, can result, because in effect, and we'll probably come to this later on, the wider the wall or the bigger the airspace that we can provide away from a noise source gives us a better acoustic reduction. So sometimes we have to have huge airspaces to produce this noise reduction that's required.
Yeah, completely agree, and we'll get into the specifics of I guess the coordination of exactly that, the floor space, and with mass barrier ceilings, obviously a critical element is ensuring that the mechanical services supply and return routes are able to be provided without being compromised. So it's always going to be, and it's a constant battle between the MEP consultant, the MEP designer, and the supplier of that mass barrier ceiling. So obviously make sure that you guys aren't compromising each other's elements, but with the proper coordination, it can happen, and it's been shown to happen many times. So it doesn't need to be a problem. It's really only a problem when we're dealing with teams that have got not a lot of experience in dealing with it, really. So what can happen when things go right? Well, the user experience is enhanced. The operator gets repeat customers, and they get lifetime users. Not only lifetime users, but generational users. Parents bring their children, those children grow up, and they then bring their children to the cinema, and it becomes a generational repetition of a customer base. And word of mouth marketing, it speaks for itself. There are a number of people, obviously everybody that goes to cinema and has a fantastic experience, is one of the first things they'll do is they'll tell everybody about it. And if they have a great food and beverage experience, if they have a great customer service experience, if they have experience the quality of a building and a very comfortable seat that's nice and quiet, and they weren't interrupted throughout the process, then yes, again, they tend to tell a lot of people about it. So in 2018, the British Film Institute released a report into the future of global cinema. So this is kind of like moving into where we're going in the fairly near future. The 2020 Meta Cinema Forum discussed the need to diversify the design of cinema spaces, recognizing that cinema design is now, in theory, going to start to change, or really has already started to change. The recognition that the design teams need to be taking into account the flexibility of these spaces, not simply be to use to put a backside on a seat and show a film, but there may be Q&A sessions, there may be various other uses for these auditoria, and these are the kind of things that the operators and the designers need to really start to take into account. And in the most recent forum that we had, there was a fantastic presentation by a team that is looking to starting to provide some concepts into exactly that, the widening use of auditoria. And then that led to really the big question: how do we make new film industry powered by great ideas that everybody can participate in? So I guess the key takeaway from that is it's all very well and good us focusing on exactly what's been done for the last 20 to 30 years, but it's really those design teams, those suppliers who are able to be more, I guess, flexible in terms of their approach, and they can run with new ideas, propose new ideas, and be ready to meet the challenges of new problems and new solutions. And I think Boral have been fairly close at the forefront of developing new technology and new solutions for items. We've certainly worked together over the last few years, John, on a couple of issues where we've had to come up with some unique solutions for problems, I remember.
Yeah, there's as you say, the cinema design is moving forward, and one of the things that we do within USG Boral is that we work closely in development, not only to overcome some of the acoustical issues that we have, or the problems that may occur, such as you know, we had a problem with the weights on the ceilings with the mass barrier. So we've actually developed a system now that is both absorbent and acoustic at the same time, so that we're actually, one, reducing the amount of space that we're taking out of the box with the ceiling acoustic isolation, but two, we're reducing the weight tremendously at the same time. But that's a specific product that we developed and passed through to yourself. We're also going into some very, very specialized ceiling solutions and wall cladding solutions now, so that we can offer the products and the solution to make these spaces that need to be more versatile and more interactive and double use and treble use more fit for that use, so that there is a different impression when you go forward into the cinema. And this is something that we are highly focused on, is which way are the architects looking, how are the new spaces and interactions and types of use for the building being created, and what can we as a manufacturer put forward or develop to meet those goals outside of the traditional, let's say, the traditional gypsum partition and gypsum ceiling. We are now looking at lots of other ways of basically enhancing and making spaces act as a double space or treble space.
Yeah, exactly right. And to that end, it's obviously a critical issue for the designers to ensure that the various members of the team, in terms of design, construction, and suppliers, are all on the same page. And so typically what will happen is we'll obviously get the design criteria and then hopefully produce a markup similar to this that will show what is required of each of the individual spaces, how they need to be applied, so everybody knows exactly what is expected of exactly which partition within the space. And that's just simply for sound insulation. Obviously, a similar layout might be produced for the acoustics required for an MEP services or for the finishes. There'll be a reflected ceiling plan showing the extent of the mass barrier ceilings. But that level of coordination and having an experience of a team like yourself and experience within the design team is absolutely critical, because we will get issues, for example, as I mentioned earlier, where we've got building services units that might be very, very close to the auditoria itself, which, okay, if they can't be moved, as you mentioned, John, there is always a solution. However, what we want to try and do is absolutely minimize the issues as early on in the project as humanly possible. If it's possible to move equipment, then that's great. But if it can't be moved, then there are certainly suppliers and contractors out there that can help to isolate this equipment. But it's that old adage that you can't solve a problem that you don't know exists. And so identifying these as early as possible is absolutely key. From my point of view...
Sorry, Paul, just to push you there. On the previous slide, everyone, you saw, or the slide before, you saw the typical wall types. More often than not, this is designed with the acoustic requirements for the building. Now, unfortunately, there are tests done for a particular wall type that will achieve a RW or an STC rating that is required in the specification. But what actually needs to be looked at very early stage for those people that are out there who are involved in this is also there's the mechanical restraint. So you may well have a wall designed at 350 mil wide, which is perfect for the acoustics in the building to achieve the acoustics, but that wall would actually need to be 450 or even 500 wide to meet the mechanical requirements for that wall to actually be stable on site. And this needs to be highlighted quite quickly because it does cause issues further down if it's not, and no one has been aware that the mechanical issue of the partition is vital, as well as just the acoustics. And this is where USG will love to actually be involved very early in the coordination, and why we spend a lot of the time with the architects that are dealing with the various operators, advising them on the widths that are actually required to meet the acoustic requirements that are also required. So it's a question there, Paul.
No, absolutely, and that's a very, very good point there, John. Because I mean, as you know, obviously, when we can coordinate on solutions like that, and it might be exactly as you say, my team is suggesting a 250, 300, or 350 mil wide system in order to meet certain acoustic requirements. Obviously, yes, there are then the MEP services, and you might come back to me to say, well, look, for structural stability, we actually need to increase that wall a little bit, or for MEP services, we need to increase that so that we can run drainage pipes within the void. And of course, we will say that's fine. Yeah, obviously, increasing the width of the system is only going to increase the acoustic performance. It shouldn't decrease, but yeah, that coordination is critical. And yes, exactly, coordination like that needs to take place to prevent issues. However, it doesn't usually happen. Well, I was about to say it doesn't usually happen that wall widths get reduced, but of course it does, because very often the architectural interior design team can be under a little bit of pressure to increase the floor space in order to increase the number of seats within an auditoria. So we do actually get requests about reducing wall widths. But yes, you're absolutely right. Our preference is to increase them, not reduce them. But of course, there's always a price trade-off against that. Okay, so very quickly, acoustic design and why is it important? Well, acoustics and sound affects everybody in a number of different ways. And the human auditory system is quite remarkable in terms of its complexity and its sensitivity. And acoustics is important to, I guess, a lot of people who are joining this webinar simply because acoustics is important to their clients. And acoustics is one of those rare, well, not that rare, I guess. Everybody in the design world thinks that when you do something right, you're not really recognized for it. But my goodness, when it goes wrong, it's one of the first things that gets picked up on, and probably no more so than noise and acoustics. Invariably, if you're in a space and you're in an auditorium, you have a perfectly good experience, and you're watching a great film. You're not really thinking about the acoustics. But if you can hear noise coming in from outside, or you can hear somebody talking on their phone within the auditorium, it's obviously one of the first things that you notice. And this is important, really, from not only a customer point of view, but there are some very important financial implications on not getting the acoustics right. And these are appropriate environments in which we live and we work and we operate. just kind of stepping outside of cinemas for a brief second, there's a very good studies have shown that when people are in work environments or professional environments where they are not conducive to the kind of work that they're expecting, that can result in a reduction of up to 2/3 productivity reduction. And if you can think of anybody that owns or runs a company and you were to tell them your workforce is potentially 2/3 less productive than they could be, then I suspect that's going to raise a few eyebrows. And at the same time, retail and commercial considerations where shoppers are forced or exposed to inappropriate sounds, those same studies have shown that you can get up nearly a quarter of your turnover reduction in sales performance. Now, if you go to any mall operator, mall owner, and you tell them this is potentially a 25 or 23 to 25% reduction in turnover simply because of poor acoustics, and they add up how much that is costing them over the course of a year, tens, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars, they then start to see that investment in acoustics as being fairly minor at the outset. So that's really something that needs to be taken into account. We've got challenges in this part of the world in terms of, everybody knows, especially Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the other GCC countries, we are comprised of many different countries, many different nationalities, many different cultures. We've got effectively standards that are being brought in from all over the world, as I touched on at the start of the talk. We've got superseded versions of guides, and I am regularly asked to quote on providing design support on projects, and we are asked to use standards which are out of date, or we are sent material submittals from suppliers and manufacturers where the test standard is out of date. It may have been superseded 3 or even 4 times behind the current standard of testing that is currently being accepted. So this is a challenge. It doesn't always result in a very different result in terms of what that system is capable of achieving, but it's very important for suppliers and manufacturers and everybody involved to make sure that they are tested and complying with the latest standards. Not only that, and something that Boral are very, very good at doing is ensuring that they've got the latest laboratory test standards for their systems. There are, unfortunately, a lot of suppliers and manufacturers out there that rely on desktop calculations and predictions of performances, but unfortunately, they're just far too generic, and those calculations can only ever take into account very generic elements, not the actual performance that is capable of being achieved by Boral. And John, I know you guys are very good at ensuring that your systems are properly tested to the correct standards. And in fact, we've been working very closely together at my laboratory in order to achieve these over the years.
Yes, and thanks very much, Paul, for making me have to retest on a regular basis and develop new systems and costing the company an absolute fortune. But it's a joy to come and meet you at your lab and try and develop yet again another system that's going to meet the new speaker outputs and low frequencies and absorption that you require that particular month or year. Yes,
thank you.
I appreciate it. It fills my day with joy.
And it's my absolute pleasure. But I guess, I mean, that really should be giving confidence, though, to the rest of the industry that, I mean, laboratories like ours and consultants like the ones that we work with are very keen to hold your guys' feet to the fire to make sure that you are complying with these standards. And it really stands out with the suppliers and the contractors that do make the effort to do that and the ones that don't. And I think anybody really can have confidence that although we've worked obviously alongside you on a lot of projects, we're obviously absolutely making sure that you guys are complying with these standards, and you're certainly not getting away with anything. We're very hard on you, I have to say. We're very harsh on ensuring that you absolutely meet these standards, because at the end of the day, it's our name as well that are going on these developments.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense. There's no point in us approving anything that's not capable of achieving a standard, because that's going to be found out very, very quickly in terms of operation. So in that respect, we don't give any leeway.
Yeah. Well, Yeah, I mean, joking aside, it's vital for us that we meet all the requirements that are out there, and with this constant testing of in both fire and mechanics and in the acoustics, it actually helps us develop new products and understand what we need to do to develop a new product even before it's testing, so we can actually start basically throwing ideas about within the company. And because of our experience in all the different types of labs, we have a basic understanding behind it, and thanks for your teaching earlier, of what will work and what could work and what definitely won't work, and it helps us with development of new products very much so.
Correct, and I am particularly encouraged. I mean, in terms of Boral's connection with the Australian entity. I mean, Boral is known the world over as one of the few benchmark-setting companies that do things properly. They develop proper products and they have them properly tested. In actual fact, along with only a couple of others, it's the Boral design guides which are used as a benchmark within the industry to make sure everybody else is keeping up. So that's certainly recognised by people like myself in the industry, and certainly the connection to Australia. As we know, Australians like to do things properly and have a very good reputation throughout the world. So just touching on wall and ceiling designs very quickly, the main reason for sound insulation, airborne and structure-borne noise, and sound insulation testing, it's a very repeatable, very predictable way to assess the quality of a build, and certainly below that which you might just be obvious from a quick visual inspection. Sound insulation testing and acoustic engineering tells us exactly what is happening below the surface, and a very effective way, as I say, to report on the quality of a build without being able to necessarily see exactly what's going on. The design standards and targets that we use, and I mentioned THX and BS8223 early on, these are kind of the mid-range, the fairly typical numbers, the typical design standards that we might see in a space. And one of the important things here is that first line on the inside auditoria, or the first two lines rather, external music and all sources other than music in terms of noise break into an auditoria. NC25 as a criteria is actually a very, very, very low noise level to achieve. If you think there's only 5 dB below that is generally considered the threshold of human hearing. And that would be for a very young child or somebody with almost completely unaffected hearing. So that NC20 being maybe a broadcast studio or a recording studio, the very next most difficult space to achieve that criteria is being a cinema, and that's typically around about NC or NR25 in old money, as it were. Now, if you think about that, that is noise being stopped from coming into an auditorium that might be created by the next door cinema or the auditorium next door. But there are also instances where we might have noise breaking from other structures or other uses in and around the development. And something that we need to be very cognizant of, and that is a picture from an existing mall in Saudi Arabia, and something that is quite common in that family entertainment zones, family entertainment spaces, which are very often very close to where the cinemas might be, have indoor roller coasters, they have indoor fun fairs, these rides, which were designed and built up to 15 to 20 years ago. Now, vibration isolation of these particular structures from the supporting slab is virtually non-existent. I haven't actually ever seen any indoor theme parks so far anywhere in the GCC that has been completely and adequately vibration isolated. Now, what does this mean? Unfortunately, if that vibration gets into the structure, and certainly during public holidays or when these spaces is going to start to be used quite considerably, there is the danger that this noise and vibration could easily break into the cinema space. And then that goes back to my earlier comment about interrupting the cinema going experience. And if that noise and vibration is experienced by a user and it's not related to the film, that can disrupt their movie-going experience and be quite frustrating and annoying sometimes. So that means two things have got to happen. The incoming cinema operator has got to make the decision to completely vibrationally float or isolate the cinema space, the entire cinema space. And that obviously has knock-on effects for you and your team, as I'm sure you'll comment on in a second, John. Or they need to go back to the operator of that roller coaster or the indoor family entertainment space and say, look, Mr. Operator, you need to isolate all of your equipment from the structure. Otherwise, my incoming cinema operator is going to have a big problem. So either way, there's going to be a costly and expensive solution that needs to be applied here. But it needs to be thought about at a very early stage, because vibration getting into your walls, John, can be quite a significant issue sometimes.
Yeah, it can be a major issue. We're actually working closely with manufacturers in the region and identifying and understanding how we can actually isolate our partitions from the structure. And that is something that we, as a solution, we now provide. So that this is, again, going back to our earlier discussions, as long as we're aware at an early stage of these issues, we can make sure that that is incorporated in our detailing and design that we submit for the cinema.
Absolutely. And I mean, and in the same respect, us as the consultants should also be assessing the material submittals that come back from people like yourself and ensure that they meet the selected criteria. And I have to say, we obviously very aware that you guys have got a considerable amount of experience of submitting exactly the right documents that are required to support the material submittals. So we're obviously very grateful to the evidence that you guys provide. Makes our jobs a hell of a lot easier when we're having to do the demonstration of compliance and our gap analysis, an example of which you can now see on the screen. So we will essentially look at every element that could possibly affect the acoustics and ensure that with our calculations and models that what is being provided and what is being proposed actually is fit for purpose. And then invariably what should happen is that the contractor, the consultant rather, comes back with that gap analysis and a compliance statement as to whether everything has been provided that is required or not. And then just to touch very briefly on the testing, because at the end of the day, we can all put forward solutions, we can all put forward products that in theory meet with the requirements, but John, as your team is, as I mentioned, is very good at doing, is ensuring that their testing and certification is up to spec. And talking about the specs, the quality of the specifications, how they're written, and ensuring that there is no wiggle room in terms of allowing the contractor and the supplier to kind of apply an interpretation, is that they're absolutely black and white. They can only be read one way, and it's very specific exactly how they're supposed to comply with it. Again, makes your guys' jobs a lot easier. You know exactly what it is that you've got to do and what is expected of you. And then you can make my job easier by providing me with the documentation and the evidence that we need.
Exactly. This is a document that we want to see at a very, very early tender stage so that we know that we're providing the correct solutions and answers to yourselves, and also so that our installers and contractors are actually pricing the job at the right way at tender stage, rather than having a nasty surprise later on.
Exactly right. So, I mean, as you have done, your systems have been tested in our laboratory, which is a purpose-built facility exactly for sound insulation testing and absorption testing. And then that supplier and material selection process comes back to us, which, as you know, can be satisfied one of a number of different ways, but ideally we will see a laboratory test report certificate from an accredited facility, or with a material data sheet, obviously telling us exactly what it is that your systems can achieve. And occasionally there are some situations that cannot be evidenced by testing in laboratory, in which case site testing data showing that the system has been capable of achieving that in the past in different location is also asked for as supplementary evidence. But obviously, as you know, that site test data is really only specific for that particular site. It's very often not transferable. However, out of all of the transferable data, it's often the case that a cinema shell is sometimes built out of only that particular product. So, for example, we might have a cinema shell that is entirely built from a wall type 1, in which case that result is not really going to differ from site to site. Because obviously, as you know, the difference between laboratory and site is the quality of the other elements of the construction, the supporting slab. There may be other elements, MEP services, penetrations that cause a weakness. But obviously, if they don't exist, then it might very well be that a site test report might be considered to be a supplementary. But you guys have got quite a comprehensive amount of site testing data, as you imagine, because you mentioned you've got nearly 45 sites that you've completed.
Yes, and it's through those that it's attention to detailing that is absolutely vital. Rather than just being a wall type 1 or wall type 2, it's actually the detailing at the head and the interfaces, and to ensure that that is done correctly, and which is why we attend most sites on a regular basis to actually inspect and sign off that the detailing and the standard of workmanship is correct. And then we are confident that we know that when you come to test on site that we will pass. And as I mentioned earlier, we've passed every single cinema that we've done or exceeded the requirements.
Exactly right. And this is an example of a test certificate and a report that would be produced, and absolutely critical. As you can see on that first page, that it is an accredited facility that is audited. Unfortunately, there are a few test facilities out there that don't like to do things entirely properly simply because it's a slightly cheaper way of doing it. But unfortunately, that does not help protect the industry. It doesn't help protect the proper suppliers and manufacturers that want to do things properly and comply with the relevant standards. So it's really important. And really, just in summary, then, to basically everything that we've talked about. The acoustic design, the attention to detail that the contractor plays, the quality of the materials and the quality of the systems that are provided by the supplier. At the end of the day, it's helping the industry to protect their most valuable asset, and that is the reputation of those in the industry, the reputation of the operator, and the reputation of those who are providing the professional solutions. And that is really what acoustic design is all about, because at the end of the day, let's face it, we're not really out there to make things look pretty. It's 99.9% about performance, repeatable performance, and provable, reliable performance. And that is absolutely key, as you can imagine, for cinemas and public performance spaces. So I guess, John, is there anything you want to add to wrapping up?
Because we've actually gone over what I'm going to suggest to Musbar, if he's in agreement, is that what we will do from this, we will run another webinar where we actually go into depth about our solutions, and we'll go through how we overcome the issues and the problems that you create for me, Paul.
Yes.
And what products we provide to overcome them. So we'll run this again, and at the start of the next one there'll be a light refresher onto the acoustics, but we'll focus more probably on the fire and the mechanics as well as the solutions.
Sure.
So
absolutely.
Pencil that in for a webinar maybe in 2 months or 3 months from now, so that everyone's got time to rest from our constant chatting away.
We're having John for the second consecutive time in a row for the presentation. No, maybe we'll have only 1 month, John. So what do you present now for a quick presentation, John, yours, or we'll have in a separate one?
We'll do a separate one, because there's a good 45 minutes in that one as well. And we will need to move forward with any questions that have been raised by this. And
Yes.
if we go into the solutions, I think that'll create questions again, which will just drag out people's time too much today.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we'll
You
have a
didn't,
separate
you didn't
one
want
for
to,
this.
you didn't want to just run through a couple of the questions that have been raised on the chat now, or we don't have
Yes.
Yeah,
Let's
let's do the questions now, and we'll run another webinar on the actual solutions another day.
Sure, because I mean, there's only 2 or 3 quick questions, so it should be quite easy to just to go through them. So one of them from Maro. Hi, Maro. Do we provide acoustic study according to material? What will we propose accordingly? What are you saying about loss of profitable revenues? Is there any indication about average percentage? Well, I mean, obviously, as a consultant, we provide acoustic studies, and Boral, I don't want to talk on your behalf, but I guess there's a certain amount of support and solutions you can provide, but when it gets to a certain level, I'm hoping you pass it to people like us, but obviously when it comes to providing solutions, we then pass it back to yourselves. But in terms of loss of profit or revenue from solutions, John Musbah, have you got any data on the potential effect of not getting the acoustics right? I mean, I guess in that respect of the potential cost of having to go back in at a later date and fix something that wasn't done properly to start with, or wasn't designed or specified properly to start with, or maybe has been value engineered out, our favorite words in the industry. I guess the answer to that is considerable, without being able to put a specific number on it.
Yeah. The cost of actually going back and rectifying mistakes or inadequate installations is quite huge, and also there's a commercial loss because obviously the cinema has to close. But the actual loss to the commercial user, if the cinema multiplex is not as good as it should be acoustically, but people are prepared to put up with it, is not a study that I have done or we have done ourselves. But yeah, rectification and for things that were not considered is an expensive chore. Yes.
Well, indeed, and I guess in order to put a number on that, if somebody just sends you an inquiry, you can send them a proposal with the appropriate cost.
It will have
exactly
profit, one for the operator themselves, as you have mentioned, Paul, during your presentation, for a certain case study happened in UAE. For the tenant, they prefer to cut off 30-35% of the rent. So this is one of the loss happen, and the other one of the word of mouth for the visitor themselves, for the users. It will affect also the reputation for the operator and for the mall or for the cinema. So it has 2-dimensional loss profitability, but till now we don't have any accurate or solid rock of information we can rely on information on.
Yeah. Follow-up question from Mohammed Sada Ali. Hi, Mohammed. Your acoustic ceiling, is it soundproof in cinema? I guess he's talking about the ensemble system there, John, which is absorptive and soundproof. So I guess you could talk about that. Oh, you're on mute, John.
I hope you could all let me because I was answering that. Yeah, the ensemble system can be used in the cinemas. It provides a good CAC and absorbent. But if you're actually looking for that solution, would actually go down the Luna high CAC system, which gives much greater CAC reduction. We can be looking at 44, 45 on a CAC with a NRC of 0.9 and above, which is sort of like, that is the product we developed, which is really unheard of. And also it's a self-contained product without having to have insulation, glass wool insulation floating above a perforated ceiling, which, especially in cinemas, can cause problems with fibre migration. So the Luna CAC, which is something we'll go into when we're talking about products at the next one, is the solution there where we don't have to provide a huge weighted sound reduction.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me add some small point for John. The Luna High CAC, we are developing also a new soft fiber with the back piece. It can give up to 40 CAC decibels. So in continuation development for new products, economical ones, and also it can fit the purpose for the cinema acoustic design requirements. So there is not a certain product, it's a continuation of a new product development, and there is a recent new one to the market with a very high CAC and NRC requirements.
Yeah, it's partly Paul, due to obviously our close coordination and the cinema forums that we go onto, and the issues that we've discovered with especially retrofitting in existing malls that has made us and forced us to develop these new products. And it's our understanding of the testing procedure and what can be achieved that's helped us develop these new products. And it's something that we are constantly striving to do, is develop new systems for the marketplace.
And following on from that, it's interesting is because there's kind of a related question. The next question was asking about, do you provide technical support, technical training for the contractors and those that use your systems on the ground? Because I can understand where this question is coming from. It's very important that, I mean, if you guys have developed a very high performance system in the laboratory, that's all very well and good. How do you make sure that the contractors are installing your product to your specifications and your standards? How are you making sure that they achieve your standards on site when they do that?
One of the things that we've focused on is actually on-site training rather than a training course in, let's say, our factory, because what's important when we're doing the on-site training, and this is for all projects that we get involved with, is that we can actually have the main contractor and the installer understanding what is and isn't required. Whereas, quite often there's a main contractor and a subcontractor argument as to what is good and what is bad. So what we do is we actually do the combined training with both, so that the people are aware of what is needed and what isn't required, and what isn't required. And the site inspection report then is a unified thing that we use across all regions, so that they can actually tick off what they've learned and actually pass on a regular basis, rather than us having to live on site every single day. So yes, we do the training at the start, and then we do regular site visits afterwards, just to maintain that the standards are where they need to be for these, especially with new products, where we're actually teaching people new ways of installation or spraying or fixing.
Yeah,
and John, these are all complementary services, correct?
Yeah. This is all complimentary. It's free. Yeah.
Well, you mean John goes and gives his time free of charge on these projects?
You catched me. No, it's not. No,
Yeah.
John.
John, you're
Paul,
you're out there too.
Yeah. I love it because I get to get out of the office. No, we have a full team now that are trained to do this. So we've got teams across the regions in the GCC that are trained to do this. And basically, well, that's what we've been doing over the last 10 years, is making sure that our training team is capable of doing the basic training that's out there for these guys. There's some of the most specialist new products. Yeah, there's a couple of us that actually have to go there and help and just supervise. Same way as yourself, Paul. You can send one acoustic engineer, or you can send someone with 25 years experience.
Yeah, go and do it. If you want something done properly,
yeah.
Do it yourself. Yeah, absolutely. No, but I enjoy Saudi Arabia. I mean, I spent 10 years living there, so it's, to a certain extent, it's a little bit like going home for me. So I'm perfectly happy to go back there. Right, well, gentlemen, Musba, John, thank you very much for this today, and thank you for inviting me to take part. And I apologise, I took up the whole hour. I was under the impression that I was supposed to talk for an hour, which is why I did. But by all means, yes, let's do another session soon, and we'll work through the specific board solutions that you guys did.
Thank you, Paul, for accepting our invitation to have this presentation, and thank you, John, for your continued support for our continuing development process. There is a lot of private questions. They are asking to have one technical webinar only for the ceiling and wall, John. So we might need to schedule it not after a couple of months. Maybe the coming consecutive month might be for your slot, John. We'll discuss it.
Yeah.
Honestly, thank you very much for this wonderful jointly webinar.
Yeah, we thought we'd do it a different way. We thought we'd do it a different way today, so that a little bit of a debate just to keep everyone's interest. Yeah.
Sure.
So thanks all for attending this technical webinar, and again thanks for the speaker. This is a kind reminder that our coming webinar, technical webinar, will be on the 25th of May, the last Tuesday of each month. Each participant will receive 1 hour credit of the CPD certificate, and along we will send the presentation materials and the recording. So thank you all for attending this webinar, and thanks for your support, and have a wonderful day. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.